Tens of thousands of football fans came to Highbury.
Electrifying!
Yes, guys, welcome back to the Cannon Podcast. Happy Monday. I hope you're all doing better than us. I can just started recording, and I've just had a first proper look at Rohan's face. You do look devastated. We're going to have a fun one. It's going to be a fun one. Welcome back to the main podcast. Thank you for being here. Make sure you like if you're watching us on YouTube, and subscribe and so on and so forth. If you listen to us on Spotify and Apple, make sure you subscribe, leave us a rating, etc., etc. Even as Arsenal's season may be going down the pan, this podcast is certainly not going to. We're going to try and provide as much good quality content as we possibly can, and we appreciate you guys listening. Is that fair, Rohan? Are you in that sort of mood?
Yesterday I was just so angry. I sat through that game and just thought, what am I even watching? Like, why am I even here?
It's been a very tough weekend. We are here to discuss, obviously, the West Ham game, but then the Liverpool game happened. I think, the Liverpool game happened this afternoon. I think that's kind of put a bit of a downer. We record these on Sunday evenings. I feel like I'm going to remember this season as being the sort of the season where every Sunday evening, us three would get together and discuss, is it over? Have Liverpool done it? And we're going, no, just give it one more week. But we've watched them. So we'll obviously come to the West Ham game. We're going to come to your questions. Going to come to loads of stuff. Obviously, the subject matter will be depressing, maybe, but hopefully we'll keep it at least entertaining. George, we did just watch as Liverpool, I don't want to say demolished Man City, because I think Man City had their chances, but obviously beat Man City 2-0. There's some stats that came out after the game, but I want to read through. So this is from Squawker. Okay. Just to recap, here are all the records that Mohamed Salah set versus Manchester City tonight. Mo Salah is the first player in Premier League history to register 40-plus goal involvements in 2 different seasons. Mo Salah is the first player in Europe's top 5 leagues to be directly involved in 50 goals across all competitions in 24-25. Mo Salah has now scored and assisted in 11 Premier League games this season, the most by a player in a single season in one of Europe's big 5 leagues since Messi for Barcelona in 2014-15. Mo Salah has provided more assists in 24-25 than any other Premier League Liverpool player has in a single Premier League campaign. On and on and on and on it goes. And yeah, look, we're going to discuss Arsenal's sort of position in the title race, and we're going to discuss how that all sort of shakes out. But I guess I wanted to start today's pod. We have a lot of looking at ourselves to do, absolutely, and we should. But this season, when Salah and Liverpool are putting up the season and the campaign that they're doing, it was always going to be tough. It was always going to be, even if we were at absolute best, we are up against that. How do you put that into context? Or where do you put that into context? Because I think it's maybe something we haven't really discussed. We spent a lot of time talking about ourselves, a lot of time talking about the issues that we have, and understandably. But then I'm seeing numbers like that, and I'm going, we have to at least include that a little bit, do we not?
I mean, well, you have to also contextualize that the one person that could have maybe not even rivaled, but come close to a season like that is out, injured, our best player. So I think the context to your question is not only can you achieve that, but can you also do it with your best weapon being out? And that logic is no. Look, part of the problem is I even had this debate recently when as one does, I've been debating everybody all the time, 24/7. But one of the debates was like this whole idea about what has Arne Slot coached as an addition, right? And what has Salah done? For me, which is an outliers, even as brilliant as Salah is, this season is an outlier for Salah. Not just as far as, an outlier for Liverpool as forwards go. Like, one of the biggest things that you didn't, I don't know if you read it, but he's 6 goals and assists away in 11 games left from a record-breaking season of any attacker in the Premier League, period. Like, when you've got...
Yep. I didn't even read 3 more out. There's more. First player to score 25 plus goals and register 15 plus assists in a Premier League season ever.
For me, but that for me is the biggest record that I heard. And then I heard how many of the output, goals and assists, is Mohamed Salah responsible for Liverpool. By the way, it's over 75%. So if I'm going to sit there and I'm going to logically say, and I'm going to plan a season squad building wise, by the way, and I'm going to rely on Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, which is what we saw with Unai Emery as a sample size, to get me over the line and win a title by achieving 75% of my output, I think that's a very big way to fail ultimately. Now, can it work? Can it happen? And a lot of things can happen in which the season did pan out the way it did. So I think on one end, you want to praise what Liverpool have done because you don't want to downplay. But I can't honestly sit there and tell you when I see one player accounting for over 75% of their total output, when I see a team and tactic-wise not change too much what they've done in attack, but more so what they've done in build-up and defense as far as coaching changes occur. But I'm not seeing the defensive shift that the attacking shift happened this year. And I'm trying to say, okay, who was responsible? And the one thing I will say is, as a man manager, what Arne Slot has been able to do with the turmoil of Mohamed Salah, Virgil van Dijk, and Trent Alexander-Arnold being in the last year of their contract, not derailing the season, speaks hugely to his potential as a coach in terms of managing a dressing room. That, I think, doesn't get spoken about enough as far as, because it's not a tactical thing for me, what is amazing about this season. It's actually the way he's been able to manage personalities. And I will end on this. Salah deserves huge praise. And I don't see him getting the praise that he deserves, not from just an output, but from a mentality standpoint. When you've got your biggest legend like Jamie Carragher criticizing your intent, your mentality, and all of this weird character assassination stuff, which to me, I don't understand from a player who objectively is going to get his head down, has agreed that he doesn't want to talk about his future, and is producing a record-breaking season. Like, mate, I don't remember a time when a player has done that in the history of football. In the last year of their contract, been able to focus. How many times do we say that you've got a contract issue and people downing tools from their contract? Has there ever been a case where, hey, let's ignore the amazing part of Salah, which on its own is an achievement, but to do it in the last year of your contract, like, it just speaks to a special human being. And we're talking about, for me, he's one of the best players to have ever played the game at right wing, period. Like, when you're talking Robin, you're talking about overall greats, the Thierry Henrys of strikers. Mohamed Salah is that for right wing, and we're seeing it. And so, yes, it's a long, convoluted way of saying I hear where the issues might be between different people, but we need to praise an individual who, for me, has blown what could be possible out of the water potentially with what he's doing.
Yeah. And I always, the Shearer record is from 94, 95, I think it is. 94, 95, 94, 95. If you get that reference, you're a hero. But yeah, and I think doing it 30 years later, in the modern era, like, to me, I always think it just adds a new sort of sheen to that sort of record. It's just it's unbelievable and it's unparalleled, and I think he will break that record. It's incredible. Rohan, things. I think when things are going wrong, let's put it that way, I think things can go into sort of binary takes, and it depends where you look and the conversations you're having. For sensible Arsenal fans, how do we kind of couch this Liverpool season with our own downfall? Because you don't want to go too far on it and say, well, that's the only reason, because there's things there. But I don't know, I guess just coming into this pod today, I was just like, let's be in the situation where everything had gone right this season. Let's say Saka had been available. Let's say the red cards hadn't occurred. Let's say we weren't having issues with mid blocks. Let's say all those things, the refs saw all that stuff, none of that had happened. We're still up against the greatest, probably, that will end up being Premier League season for an individual ever. Yeah. We're still up against a freak in terms of, if Liverpool max out their points tally, I think they'll have a top 5 Premier League finish ever, in terms of just points tallies in general. In this era, in how competitive the Premier League is now, we'd still be up against a freak type season. So, again, I guess the same question to you as I said to George. How do you sort of hold those two together and come out feeling okay?
Yeah, I mean, Arsenal would be closer for sure. I think if we would have had the same sort of fortune that Liverpool have had in terms of injuries, and that's not to downplay what they've done, because they've capitalised to it with full ferocity. And I think for me, when we look at Salah, and I saw a tweet a couple of days ago about Kevin De Bruyne, and it was a comp of Kevin De Bruyne, all of his major actions for City, and they're just like screamers outside the box, left, right foot. And at the top level, quality is always the driver. So you go through the years, right? Arsenal, Thierry Henry. And that's just one player, right? But there's loads of other players. But in terms of like talisman, you've got Henry, Arsenal, Rooney, Manchester United alongside Ronaldo for Madrid, Messi for Barcelona, De Bruyne for City. You know, you've got lots of Robin and Ribery for Bayern Munich. The list is endless, and Salah at Liverpool. The driver is always quality over tactics at the very top. And the reason why I say that is you could be the most tactically astute manager out there, but if you do not have the quality, ultimately you are not going to be able to fulfill your potential. Whereas you can afford a manager who may not be the best tactically, still very good, but if you've got top quality, as long as you can supplement that quality, you'll be able to scam results and you'll be able to really build consistency. And I think when I look at Liverpool, I think Arne Slot, what George mentions about the personalities, it's kind of similar to Ancelotti as well in terms of how good Ancelotti has been over the years, is that man management side of things. He's still strong tactically, but I think when we look at Ancelotti and we look at the greats over the years, I think a lot of people, including myself, will attribute the man management, the ability to handle egos, as one of his biggest strengths, if not the best manager out there to being able to do that. You know, and that's why that Real Madrid team wins consistently in the Champions League. And I think Arne Slot's done the same thing, whilst also implementing some really good tactical tweaks in their build-up and how they've been able to kind of adapt depending on different teams in their build-up. So they've done fantastic in that regard. But I think we do need to remember that Liverpool were in a title race last season as well. So this isn't a team that has just came out of the blue. So they were always going to be up there with us. I didn't think that they would be as good as what they have been this season. And that's, I think, the frustration that I have. But the bigger frustration I have for me is that we can look at Mikel and we can look at certain games this season that he hasn't done well enough in the league. But the driver has been the injuries, and I'm not going to use that for this game against West Ham, even though there is that big caveat. But the driver has been the turbulence that we've endured this season so far. And I think we said it in the pod previously, this was going to be a very tricky task, right? Once we've lost Havertz, Jesus, Saka, Martinelli, it was always going to be turbulent. We said that in the Leicester game, post-Leicester. We said, you know, this is good, but get ready for some ups and downs along the way. And I didn't expect it to be West Ham, but here we are. That was always going to be the case. So I think this season for me, my thoughts haven't changed on it. I think this team has not been able to reach its potential because of external factors. That's not to say that we couldn't have done better internally, but I think there's so much you can really do. There's not. Like, he's not a miracle worker, Mikel. With what he has right now, it is going to be very difficult, and that's where I stand on it. I think the cup performances, I've said many times, is where I look at the big criticisms for me. But in the league, even though, like I said, the West Ham game we'll get into, I can't be too hypercritical of this team this season on our league form. I just can't.
Yeah. I think certainly the external factors are a massive part. I think there's more stuff we can do, as you were sort of alluding to, but as we'll come to, but yeah, you can't ignore it. And I guess what you were saying earlier, every team who's won something has had a player, an attacking player who defines it in some way, whether that is Salah or Ronaldo or Messi or whatever it is. The only player who that might have been for us,
Saka,
is on the bench, he's out.
Yeah,
so, you know, like that, and you know, it comes to the point where you can kind of blow these things out a little bit and get out of this game or that game and just look back and say, you know, okay, name me a team who's won a title without that sort of player.
You can't, mate. You can't. Literally, and that's why when Saka went down, you know, I'm very optimistic. You know, sometimes you could probably say deluded, but when Saka went down, I said, I don't think we'll win it. I don't think we'll win it. Because there's not a single team in history, right, that has not had a star attacker who has been out for a prolonged period of time and they've won the league. Even go to Leicester, right? You know, Salah, I think the points that he's won for Liverpool this season before Man City was 31. That's the most since Jamie Vardy in Leicester's title-winning season. Leicester's title-winning season, Jamie Vardy, Riyad Mahrez. You know, Chelsea go through Drogba, Lampard, Man United, Rooney, Ronaldo. There's so many more. Henry for Arsenal. Like, it's... No. Quality always dictates, mate, at the top level. It is literally the driver. Like we're called like tacticos is what I like to say, right? But and it's very important. But without the quality, you're not going to be able to do something substantial over a course of 38 games, in my opinion. Especially with how competitive it is now outside the top six.
For sure. Well, we'll have to leave that conversation there a little bit as we'll come to West Ham. Really frustrating day, 1-0 against West Ham. I've got some numbers here in terms of the record, because there was some numbers that came out and I wanted to do a bit of a dive into actually where we're at with these teams. I think, Mikel, I'm right in saying that our last 18 against the big teams, or the traditional big six, we haven't had a loss. But some numbers came out and I want to read them. Mm-hmm. So in our last 6 games against West Ham, in all competitions, we've won twice, drawn once, and lost 3 times. In our last 6 against Fulham, we have 2 wins, 3 draws, and 1 loss. In our last 8 against Villa, we have 2 wins, 1 draw, and 5 losses. In our last 8 against Newcastle, the same record again, 2 wins, 1 draw, and 5 losses. George, really tough afternoon. I think for me, this game fits into that category again of, and we'll come to maybe how we solve mid blocks in general, as we've discussed before, in a more wider sense. But specifically, this West Ham game fits into a tricky physical mid block where we don't get any joy centrally. We're lacking attacking talent. Obviously, we have our 4 best attackers out. We're frustrated, and we come away with the same sort of feeling of why we've lost in our mouths, which I think is a lot of the frustration. And unfortunately, it has to go into that category of these seemingly upper mid-table, maybe traditionally clubs. Depends where Villa or West Ham or whatever are now. But for me, it fits in that category of those games that we are struggling in more widely. I think to lose that in that way was really frustrating. But yeah,
this is a very valid point to say that our record against the top 6 is abnormal. But what use is it if you're going to have that kind of record against mid-table clubs when you're trying to fight for a title? It is 100% valid to say that it cancels each other out. Because it does. And I just want to group those because you individually group them. But amongst those, you just cited 21 games. Guys, we won 5 of those 21 games, which works out to 24% of those games were won. Of 21 games in a season. Like we know when we talk about losing in bunches, it's not just bunches, but we're losing in the same game state. That's a pattern, that's a problem. And I think we need to be honest about that as a club in terms of assessing where it goes wrong. And if, I think maybe that's something we can maybe do together as a 3 when we address it in another pod about solutions and actually using the tactical board. Because
I think we can come. Yeah, I think we'll come to that later, even on this pod.
But I was going to go back to West Ham essentially to group this in about what the problems we saw with West Ham specifically. I think what really frustrated me, guys, is especially with Graham Potter's mindset, having Jared Bowen as your lone striker outlet, going essentially a back 5-4-1. It was, I'm going to camp the box. I don't trust that you're going to effectively pull apart my defensive block. That's what the fundamental thing was with this Graham Potter setup. And I think if you wanted to isolate moments with like the Bowen goal, I'm not comfortable. I think it was really poor. There was a lot of blame. We can go into that if you really want to go into it. But it is an isolated thing that for me hasn't happened enough. But there is a player that I do think it's happened to quite a bit about stepping out of his defensive line. But that's not the reason we lose West Ham consistently. For me, the reason that we lose West Ham consistently for me is that despite a period of, I'd say, maybe 25 to 35 minutes of actually fairly good play in terms of coming inside, having some scoop balls, having some underlapping runs, breaching the line, having instances where we flash a goal or the ball rather across the face of goal and no one's there, having our moments like that, okay, and then not capitalizing on it. And then the panic when we don't get what we want and it's still in a 0-0 drawn state. How many times have you guys seen us lack tempo, not be aggressive, not be direct against this type of opposition, and then lull ourselves either into a conceding game state or maintain the draw but never look threatening enough to enter the block? That for me is the fundamental issue. It came from, again, Mikel trying to trust another Zinchenko, Miles Lewis-Skelly, Trossard pod was the game change. And again, it came from a redundancy to add on the ball presence to an already packed middle that I struggle to understand when your attacking identity is to attack wide. If you were trying to collectively analyze Arteta's attacking identity, forget if we agree with it or not, okay? We attack wide, we enter the box wide, and we actually do it very well to the point that we are the highest team in the league for penalty box entries. But it is attacking width. That is what we do, right? So my question, really simply, is if that is your remit, that is your identity, why are you adding more players central when the opposition have already added more players central, and your attacking identity is not to attack through the center of the pitch, but to attack out wide and then remove your wide presence whilst already injured? Like, this for me is something that Mikel does repeatedly. And I don't know, I'd love to ask Rohan, you guys, I don't have a logical solution to why he did that. I've been trying over the last 24 hours. And guys, this isn't the first time that he's chosen to add on the ball presence central to park to respond to a mid block that is denied central access. So I'm trying to understand the point of view because it's failing, and it's failed over 21 games. And this is a consistent issue with Mikel in his coaching. So I don't know. I don't have the answer to that, but that's my take on the West Ham issue.
I think in this specific game, if I'm going to be extremely charitable to Mikel, I could, and I'll come back to this, I could look at the bench and say, okay, he's got Jorginho, realistic options to change the game. Jorginho, Miles, Sterling, Ben White, Zinchenko, and Tierney. And you could argue maybe Ben White, if you're being really charitable, Ben White isn't fit and, whatever, and maybe he's thinking, well, if I had a bit more technical quality in the middle with Zinchenko or whatever. But that's just this game, and I agree that this is a wider problem. And then you're looking at the dual numbers. Even when we do go in centrally, I think Scott Willis put some good numbers out there. I think we've got there was 66 ground duels that we contested. We won 13, we lost 36, and that was on the ground. And then in terms of the air, we had 36 we contested, and we won 17 and lost 19. But if you look at the maps, you can go on X at Scott J Willis, does some great stuff. If you look at where the duels are contested, there is nothing in the middle of the pitch. We have no access in there, and even when we do go in there, we do lose. But there's nothing going on in there. So even when we do add players in there, it's not like we create more play in there. It feels like we just have bodies in there that either don't get the ball or can't seem to make anything happen. Rohan, I'll bring you in on this.
Yeah.
I agree. In terms of changing the game against West Ham, I can't understand this usage of the wide areas. Again, as I say, maybe if I'm looking at that bench and being charitable, maybe Ben White's only fit to play 10 minutes, but Kieran Tierney's also on the bench. And this is a radical thing from Mikel Arteta, you could ask a player to do something they don't love doing. And this is maybe my thing that I want to tee you up with, is I think maybe one of the only answers to George's question that makes sense is that Mikel just doesn't love asking players to do anything that they don't want to do. Or maybe to be more charitable, Mikel wants to make players comfortable, which I get. But with someone like an Alexander Zinchenko, that is the perfect player to say he's fit, he's available. Yes, he is someone who could come inside, but you've made an active choice to have that player come on and be a player who is central again and occupying those spaces. That is absolutely a player you've used before. He's a senior player in your dressing room. You could ask him to go and stand out there and be that overlapping option as he was for Pep, and he isn't. So there must be a choice aspect in this, and I think it's to do with comfortability. That's my best take, but yeah, I'm interested in yours.
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts on this. So in terms of the trend, though, of Arsenal, right, against these teams, I said it, so after Newcastle, I've said it for a long time, like Arsenal's tactical kryptonite are these physical mid-blocks, these teams that are willing to meet us in the middle of the park, squeeze the space, and not allow us to kind of face play and have time on the ball. And Clive Palmer responds to me, and he agreed to it, and he went to me like, what do you think are the solutions to this? And I said that, well, firstly, you need runners. You need runners, players who are going to be able to stretch the team, stretch the opposition so their line of engagement drops deeper and deeper. Liverpool, if you watch Liverpool play and Man City, at their absolute best, Man City, how many times does Kevin De Bruyne receive outside the block, they're up against a mid-block, and he'll just play that ball over the top every single time. Plays the ball over the top, they've got runners, and then latch onto a second ball, and the opposition is thinking to themselves, in that scenario, we can't stay up here because they are constantly threatening the back line. But we don't do that enough. Now, in Mikel's defence in this game, I can understand why we didn't do that enough, because we didn't really have the options there available with Martinelli out. But then I could argue, and I know people will say, well, he was absolutely awful against Leicester, but Raheem Sterling is probably our best option in terms of being able to do that. Yes, you may not agree with picking him because he's not been playing well, but in terms of profile, I felt that suits him in terms of that type of game. He may not have played well, but that's what I would have certainly done from the get-go. So that's one thing that you need to do against mid-blocks. And the other thing is also just increasing the tempo when you shift it from side to side. We do it too slowly against these teams as well, and I think it allows teams to really shuffle from side to side really well. And one thing I'll take from West Ham in this game, right, is so we talk about mid-blocks and physical mid-blocks, and there is that trend. But West Ham are the first team to deploy the tactics of effectively being very aggressive on our right-hand side since Bayern Munich last season. So that's what I immediately thought when I was at the game watching it. I thought, they are not letting us breathe on our right-hand side. Every single time, right? Bayern Munich did this. So we scored that opening goal against Bayern with Saka, and then Ben White had a big chance as well, and he missed it. And it came from Ødegaard stepping outside the block, having a lot of time on the ball, and playing these balls over the top. That Saka, Ben White, Ødegaard triangle was cooking. And Tuchel changed it. He said to Konrad Laimer, who was operating in the pivot, you follow Ødegaard. Wherever he goes, follow him, because we can't allow him to have time on the ball. And they went man-to-man towards our right-hand side of the pitch. West Ham did exactly the same thing yesterday with Edson Alvarez. I think it's Scarles, the wing-back.
Ollie Scarles.
Yeah, and Cresswell. And they matched us every single time. And the reason why they were aggressive there is because when Scarles jumped, that meant Cresswell had to shift wide. But Cresswell's very comfortable in doing so in a back five because Cresswell's played as a left back for his entirety of his career. So they were so aggressive on our right-hand side. And the left-hand side, they weren't as aggressive because that is a trade-off that you have to take. And Arsenal did some good things through the left-hand side, to be fair to them, but it wasn't enough threat. It wasn't enough creativity. And that's where I felt... I was at the ground, I was thinking, this game needs a Kieran Tierney. Yeah. I was screaming for it. We need a Kieran Tierney in this game. And that's what I didn't understand. The only thing with the Alexander substitution, I think Mikel was thinking is, and I think we can talk about this in terms of Declan Rice and the role again that he had in this game, where I think for me, that was his worst game in an Arsenal shirt. It wasn't atrocious, but I don't think Declan Rice has been as poor in that game as other games. But then I asked myself, well, is Declan Rice really being maximised in this game, in that role? No. And that's why I think he brought on Zinchenko to get someone comfortable receiving height inside the block and being able to turn and spray it wide. I think that was the idea, but I felt the game needed something a little bit different, personally. Just like with a Ben White on the opposite side. But maybe with the Ben White, it is maybe because he's not fully fit. That was the only reason I felt he didn't come on earlier. But if he was fully fit, then that is certainly a criticism I would have of Mikel. Can we just
dive in, though, to the idea of Ben White? Because it's not... So, okay, fine, he's not fit. Like, it doesn't matter, like, when he came on. We saw what it was. But why can't Kieran Tierney perform the same role on the left when you already have Jurrien Timber inverting at right back? The entire ability about having somebody to receive central in the block, by the way, and turn is Jurrien Timber's profile. Why can't we switch our triggers in offensive and deep phases to the left? We talked about this with Ødegaard on the Scouted. This is my biggest frustration with Mikel. And we see what Ben White was able to do. And for me, it's not because Ben White is some crazy player that he's the reason we've lost this season. It is a profile difference. And when you have Kieran Tierney, who plays that exact same role, and you have a Jurrien Timber, who can play the Zinchenko role, and then you don't add a Jorginho who fixes your tempo and has actually been our best tempo-setting midfielder in the midfield this season. That for me has been the case. So when I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I look at what he changed, he also introduced Miles, guys, in addition to Zinchenko. So now Miles is another tempo-setting midfielder that can turn inside the block. There's a redundancy there. There's a redundancy in terms of what you're offering and your solution. And he does this far too often. And just to end on that last point that you talk about with Thomas Tuchel, if you can't play in behind runners because you lack the effective width, you need to have effective width to draw people out. That's also the one thing that when you talk about the Tuchel change, it's not just a ball over the top. It's that you've got a wide threat that means, okay, Cresswell or Skiles has to meet that threat because they have the legs to run on the outside. What we didn't have was we had Ethan, we had Ødegaard, we have Timber. All three of those players, by the way, didn't have effective running power on the outside. As soon as Ben makes that, we started pulling apart that side. We started opening things up. And we can do that on the left with Kieran Tierney. Even if you don't like Sterling doing it, by the way, Kieran Tierney has the same running power, who, by the way, was in form and in cameos, had delivered a big chance every time he came on the pitch. So that's my bubbling frustration with
honestly,
this.
Just to quickly end on this from my perspective, it's like I said, I think what West Ham did to our right-hand side was very similar to what Bayern Munich did to our right-hand side. And again, the trade-off of allowing us to have a little bit more of the ball through the left, because they knew that Arsenal weren't going to be as effective through the left as they were through the right. And that's where I felt it was really frustrating, because Ethan wasn't getting into any advantageous / favourable conditions in the entirety of the game, because every time he got the ball, West Ham were already squeezing that space really quickly through the right-hand side. How many times did you see Ethan really have space 1v1 in that entire game? He didn't have, and that's why I think this is where, you know, when a team locks down one side, you need to have more solutions for the other side. And I didn't think that we did that well enough. And that's the big frustration for me. And that's where we talk about playing with more symmetry, right? So it's and I do think that there were things that we could have done better, like George has alluded to, in this game that could have helped us in that regard. So.
Just to add some number context to that as well, if you look back at the dual maps that I was talking about earlier, the numbers on the right are really not good at all. I think I won't single anyone out, but no one on our right hand side, barring Jury and Timber, won more of their duels than they lost. Everyone was
there you go.
under 50%, and also all of the basically on the dual map, there's sort of red triangles and blue triangles. Almost all of the red triangles are in that right hand area, so you're absolutely backed up. Same in the air. Yeah, it's really confusing to me. I really don't understand it, because as George was sort of alluding to, it's not as if Mikel hasn't used this before and hasn't benefited from this before. So it's you know, you'd understand if it was an ideological thing that a coach just will never do, and you go, okay, I disagree, but at least you've never done it, and it's an ideological thing you're never going near. He has done it. Rohan, I want to return to, before we move on to maybe some other individual performances, I want to return to your point about
especially George.
you'll know where I'm going with this. I want to return to Declan Rice. What did you, because you were out of the ground, right?
Yeah.
What did you feel was up? Because I didn't know if he was injured. I couldn't work it out.
Fans weren't happy, mate, especially where I was sat. I was thinking maybe it's an injury.
Too.
You know, when you're at the game, right, you honestly, like, I can never understand when people do a fan cam after a game and be really confident in their opinion. You don't see, you barely see any of the game, mate, regardless of your view, trust me. But in that moment, I felt it was an injury, and he said it was a tactical decision that he made. And I get that, but my frustration with the Declan Rice thing is the usage of Declan Rice in these types of games. This is where we always come back to this with regards to Declan Rice. He has said many times, and he said it in that Athletic interview, where he likes to play as a number 8 when the game opens up and it becomes stretched. This was never a game like that. It's never a game like that in which it's stretched and there's space for Declan Rice to run. What you saw is Declan Rice between the lines, back to goal, looking to get the ball on the half turn and to drive and to create something. That's not his type of game, mate. It's just not. It's not who Declan Rice is as a player. You know, and that's not to say that he can't play as a left central midfielder. It depends on the game. And that's why I think when we look at, forget about the really finer details, right? Arsenal set up nominally in a 4-3-3, and our 2 number 8s are Declan Rice and Martin Odegaard. Neither of them were effective. So how are you really going to be able to create substantial openings when your 2 number 8s are not going to be are not effective in this game? Especially when you've got someone like Jurriën Timber. And I've said it many times in this podcast. The beauty of Jurriën Timber and Ben White is that their best qualities lie in different areas of the pitch. And this game was a Ben White game. It was very much. It wasn't a Jurriën Timber game. You saw the amount of times he did get in the final third. The quality is just not what Ben White. It's not what Ben White can do, and that's just the difference. And there are other things that Timber does way better than Ben White does. You know, and we've said that many times. But that's where I'm looking at and thinking, when you've got one fullback who's not as effective in this sort of game state, you've got 2 number 8s who aren't being effective. Calafiora, I actually felt, played some really nice passes, especially in the first half, through the lines of some really good ones to Trossard. But ultimately, you've got a lot of players there who are not really platforming your attackers, and that is the big problem here. So, yeah, I think with Declan Rice, it's just the frustration of you're not. It makes him look a lot worse. You know, when you
Can I
play in
ask
that
you guys
way, sort
a
of-
question? Why do you guys think Mikel is more willing to put certain players in positions that don't thrive and others he refuses to put them in positions that they don't thrive in? Because Declan is an example of being asked to be put into a position he doesn't thrive in. Martinelli is another player who he consistently puts in a position that he doesn't thrive in. But then there are other players in which he categorically refuses to move. And the point is,
Let me translate.
success.
Let's have the Odegaard conversation. Let's have the Odegaard conversation, because obviously that's something that we're alluding to here. I think my frustration, I'll come to you first, George, because I know you've got stuff to say on this. My frustration with this is I think that sort of game, I was watching it back earlier on for something, and the positions that Odegaard was finding himself in, unfortunately, in this sort of game, in a mid-block game, were more suitable for an Ethan Nwaneri. They just absolutely were. I think one of my issues with and it's not about replacing Odegaard with Nwaneri, whatever it might be. In this game, the positions that Odegaard was picking himself up in, the game states that he was sort of being provided in his play, it was right for a Nwaneri in terms of between the lines, receiving the ball. I think my problem with Odegaard in these sorts of games, when he's being physically pushed off it, you know exactly what he's going to do. When he's between the lines and receives it, he drops off every single time. He doesn't take it on the back foot. He doesn't drive with it. He doesn't turn with it. He doesn't have that variety. If he's deeper in these sorts of games, he can be that person that we're talking about in terms of dictating the tempo. He can be that person who's threading the other needle. He can be the person playing that ball through the mid-block into players like the Ethans and the Trossards, etc. And another frustration for me is the difference makers in this game were so wide. The players who are actually going to give you the final action are, we've got Saka, Martinelli, Jesus and Havertz out. But in this game, the guys who are going to give you a final action were probably, I'm fair in saying, Ethan and Trossard. And they were the widest players in this game. Martin Odegaard, love the guy, but he was the person who was most central for us and most sort of ahead of the ball. And it absolutely didn't suit him. And in these sorts of games, I think this is why the Odegaard discourse has sort of come out after this game, because these are the games that really highlight those limitations. It's not that he's a bad player. No one wants him out. It's not those things. But he, in these sorts of games, really, in my opinion, doesn't thrive because he's pushed off it and he's limited. George, go on.
Okay. When you have a player that is not performing an action, okay, and you want to cite form, you want to cite a lack of confidence, one thing I'm going to lead this discussion with is you can have a negative action. You can fail and not be a failure. You can hide and not be a coward. This jump between criticizing the con and limitation of a player to then making it a character assassination attempt is clutching your pearls about a player that you like. And this, for me, when you start to see things that are repetitive, they're a pattern. Now, I'm going to provide the problem, I'm going to provide solutions, and I'm going to provide what I'd like to see so that we're complete in this analysis. And I'm going to be very clear. Not only have we seen this idea of him being pushed out of the ball and him going out of the block, but we've seen visible frustration from Mikel inciting that he would like to get him closer to goal. There is a combativeness right now that I know is coming from Mikel that wants his number 10s to be closer to goal. And there is an instinct from Odegaard to drop out of those positions because he doesn't trust his physical limitations to compete in tighter areas up the pitch. We've seen this. We've seen it consistently. I shared a clip that got a lot of attention on X about him in transition. And we need to have an entire discussion about this team in transition because he's not alone. But what frustrates me, mate, is even when we have space, he consistently makes a wrong decision in what type of supporting run he makes. And in the clip I shared, it was a knockdown from Marino that Ethan has drifted to the left. Odegaard has drifted to the left. We're doing things, by the way, that I've said I want to see. So I showed that clip very intentionally. Is actually something not normal that we actually had as a solution to maybe try to open up West Ham. And when we play the ball out to Trossard, who's 1v1, and Odegaard is making that forward run, what does he do? Instead of continuing the underlapping run, which, by the way, is shorter, that was less marked, and he would have received a pass on the inside, which would have been to his strong foot. He decided to go away and make a run on the outside that people are claiming and telling me that it was the same run that Mikel Merino made. Mate, that's wrong. A back post and a near post run are the most basic transition runs that you're going to see. This isn't basketball tactics. These aren't unified new things that happen. Making multiple runs and routes is what happens in transition. One is near post, one is back post. Everybody does it. But to make a conscious decision to run longer, to put more opposition players between you and the ball, and if you had received the imaginary cross, to have done so on your weak foot that you historically don't use well, for me, is a bad decision making in transition. So it's not just that he drops out of the block, that he doesn't want the contest there. It is the decision making in transition that he struggles with. And this isn't the only instance. This isn't the only time. And what I would like to ask is, how do we support a player? Because this is a time when he was on the left. So it's not even a right-hand issue. Okay, this was a time when him and Ethan have both drifted left. They're combining together on the left in the same zone. They are going away from the positional play, right? Like, this isn't a position debate. This is now freedom in transition. How do we support it? And there's issues with the number of players that we're going to transition with. There's an issue with the decisions we make in transitions, and those decisions leading to shots. And once again, it's an attack that breaks down and an inability for us to exploit this deep block. That, for me, I don't care that he's not Florian Wirtz. Like, can we stop the really poor analysis there? Because he's not going to be that profile. I don't care. But I said this point on Twitter. If Pirlo made that run away from support, I would be critical of it. And the reason I said that is that somebody historically who can't run, or was said that can't run, if he's making a decision not to support his teammate, not to make the shorter run, not to make a run that is less congested, not to make a run that is on your stronger foot, again, all three things that are the pros in the decision-making process, there's an issue there. There's an issue there. And so that for me, when we're talking about the Odegaard discussion and we're talking about everything with all of this, it's about putting him in places for me that he feels comfortable in. But at the same time, when he's in positions that he's not comfortable in, he's got to make good decisions. And if he can't do it consistently enough, he's going to face criticism. That doesn't mean you're banished to the shadow realm. That doesn't mean then that we can't critique, because there's other players that have done that too. But this is a major issue when you're talking about asking your number 8s, your number 10s, your creativity, that this season factually has been down from every other season. It's a creative issue with a player who is tasked with our biggest burden of creativity.
I think well said. I think what you're alluding to there in terms of other players doing it, like that specific moment, if you haven't seen it, I think it's about 46 or 7 minutes in. You can go back and watch the game. Certainly early second half. Yeah, it's just the wrong decision, and I've hammered Havertz for it before as well. It's not, it's players. You can't just predict every single moment in every single game. There's going to be moments where you might be the left full back, but there's a bit of space over on the right, and you might be the free man to put the ball in the back of the net. That's the aim of the game. So just go and do that. And it was the wrong call. But I think maybe what's specific in Ødegaard's case is, I've said before that I think some of the issue here is Mikel is always asking players to do the only things they're absolutely comfortable with. I think a lot of the reason Havertz doesn't sometimes make the centre forward run he needs to make is because he's just doing what needs to be comfortable with, right? But I think with Ødegaard, there feels to me, Rohan, like there is sort of what Ødegaard's comfortable with and what he's being tasked to do, and I don't feel them matching up. In this game, and also the sort of what the game needs as well. I don't feel that sort of triangle makes sense, where I'm watching a team with a lack of final action guys central. I'm watching a team that's struggling to switch play quickly and sort of get the tempo going. I'm watching Ødegaard unable to receive centrally, by no fault of his own. It's just not the best thing he can do. I want him deeper. Arteta's wanting him closer to the goal, supposedly, from everything we understand and from his positioning, but also his instinct, as George is alluding to, is to drop out. There just feels to me like a real confusion around what he is at the moment. And I think that's leading to a lot of confusion in the fan base, because we don't know how to judge him. We don't know what we're expecting. And then we're seeing moments like that and going, well, he should be this. And then everyone's going, no, it should be this. And da-da. It just feels like a real confusion to me at the moment around what his best qualities are. I think there's a really clear solution for me with Ødegaard. Just pull him deeper. Get one in that specific game. I'd have put Waneri central and had Ødegaard playing the passes into him. Yeah. I think he cooks. Then he's got freedom to go over to the left. He's got freedom to go out wide. He's got freedom when he wants to drop into that half space and pocket and play those inventive passes. But he's not always there, being the one back to goal, receiving the pass. That doesn't suit Ødegaard specifically in mid-block games like this. So yeah, weird time for him in this team, I feel.
I mean, like I said, this game, right? West Ham, Ødegaard did drop very deep outside the block many times, but they matched him every single time he dropped out. Edson Alvarez or Cresswell or the wing back, one of them would jump, and they would, depending on how West Ham were orientated and what their shape was. It didn't matter who it was, but someone had to do that because they recognised that Ødegaard, when he is deeper, right, and he has time on the ball, he's a very, very clever footballer in terms of what spaces to find, the passes to make, and that's who he is. That's how you maximise him. Whether it's to the right or the left, that is his best quality, in my opinion. It is not someone inside the block, receiving the ball in congested spaces up against a physical central midfielder. He's very good at being able to step out and get on the ball, but what follows, I don't think it's Ødegaard's best game. Whereas Ødegaard's best game is when the game is in front of him. But then we go to the summer, and we've said this many times, there seems to be a real confusion here because the way that Ødegaard is going to be used, theoretically, with Zubimendi coming in, is in a role that I don't think is his best role. Mikel seems to think otherwise, depending on how you view the quotes that he has said about Ødegaard in terms of getting him closer to goal, etc. But that's something that remains to be seen. Ultimately, what I think it is with Ødegaard this season, and I've said this, I think Ødegaard's a fantastic player, and I'll stand by that. But when you look at Bukayo Saka and Ødegaard, Bukayo Saka, you give him a piece of string, he'll make something out of it. Something. Martin Ødegaard can't do that. And that's okay. That's completely fine. But then when you don't have the players around you, which is what Ødegaard needs, a Ben White and a Bukayo Saka, an elite talent in Bukayo Saka and someone in Ben White who makes selfless runs every single time. He did it in this game as well when he came on. It gets the best out of Ødegaard because you've got the players around him to allow him to thrive. And that's where you see a fantastic Ødegaard. But when you take that away, Ødegaard then, being the captain, it seems like he has to be the guy. But he isn't the guy in that sense. And that is the biggest issue you have here. And I don't think that will ever change, in my opinion. Ødegaard is someone who he can get to such a strong level. And last season he was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic, post-November and onwards. But a lot of that is due to what's around him in order for him to be fantastic. Whereas someone like Bukayo Saka, every player, when you're surrounded by top players, your level goes up. But Bukayo Saka can still maintain that level even without those types of players. Go and watch him for England. Go look at what we saw in the Euros. He had Carl Walker, who was absolutely atrocious throughout the entirety of the tournament. Bukayo Saka was still England's best attacker alongside Jude Bellingham, because he can make things happen out of nothing. He can create in isolation. Martin Ødegaard can't do that. But Martin Ødegaard can be a fantastic player when he has got those types of players around him. And that's what it is for me. Like, this game, he did many times he came outside the block. He tried to, but he wasn't effective because West Ham matched him and he didn't have the players around him as well to allow him to thrive.
Yeah, and I think on that players around him thing, we discussed many things that I think are valid and stand alongside what I'm about to say. But equally, there is form. There is the fact that he's not been surrounded by Saka and White for a long time. It's just periods of games. To be honest, there was points in game yesterday where I was like, "Are you fully fit?" And that's not an excuse. I'm just saying, as well as all of these things, I don't see that same sort of burst in him as I've seen before. I think I also, what you were sort of alluding to there, I guess I just find with Ødegaard, I looked at his heat map yesterday, and it's very just in that right half space. And it feels like he's almost got two options at the minute. Go and be the guy stood in the block waiting for the ball, in my opinion, doesn't suit him, or you're stuck in possession on that right-hand side. And for me, I'm much more interested in a more dynamic Odegaard game when if a Zubimendi comes in, for example, he can be like, actually, I'm going to go and stand in the half space because the game suits it. And I'm going to go and drop deep for sort of 5, 10, 15 minutes, and you push up, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be this rigid, I'm here or I'm here. He's almost given the keys and allowed his game IQ, his obvious game IQ, and his obvious intelligence and timing and rhythm and tempo to really affect us and help us and, as you say, lift the team. Just feels really confused at the moment with Odegaard, and we'll I'm sure we'll come back to it at some point.
Really quick question, and I won't extend this much longer.
Go on.
But okay, you're looking at the collection of the midfield, okay, and this for me has been the biggest problem. Because I don't want to go on Odegaard. People get really personal when you do names. And so I'm just going to keep this football.
Player wars, George.
I know, but it's like, okay, let's just keep it super. The idea of areas in space, okay? So if you're telling me that Martin Odegaard is going to drop out of the block for whatever reason, okay, to try to get space, whatever the why is, I actually don't really care. But he's going to drop out. Can you guys name me where the space is when Thomas Partey and Yuri and Timber are sat there? Ignoring what Odegaard is, can you guys please tell me where the space is for a third person to be in that area and drop out of the block, please? It doesn't make sense. On the left, I'm going to give you the exact same thought experiment. Can you guys please tell me where the space is for Miles, Trossard, and Zinchenko all to exist, who are all players, fundamentally, Trossard, maybe we'll leave him out, but at least Miles Lewis-Skelly with Declan Rice, okay, in the same side, and Zinchenko. Where is the space for those three players to exist on the left of an anchor? I don't understand it. And so when you're talking for me, guys, it's just about redundancy, and I don't even have a thing about Odegaard. Like, I've addressed the weaknesses separately, and I'm talking here purely about spacing. Why are we adding 3 people into the same zone? It doesn't make logical sense to me, especially when we're actually looking at that zone and it is the most defended zone for West Ham. Like, I'm sat there and I'm trying to think to myself, okay, it's like asking, for you to do a rondo, right? And you've got a rondo with maybe 2 or 3 people. Let's add another 4 people into the rondo, and I want you to complete more passes. That's the logic that I'm seeing right now as far as space goes. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest Mikel issue that I have, is a redundancy in the type of zone. So if you want Martin to drop out, or Martin will drop out, then get one of Partey or Timber out to get out of there. If you're refusing to remove Odegaard. Now, if you're willing to open the idea that Odegaard can't be there and he can be in other zones, then great. But don't put on Miles Lewis-Skelly, Zinchenko, who both like the exact same zones of the pitch. Different players, but like the same zones.
It's a really weird one as well, because it's like, and I've said this as well before, where Mikel speaks a lot about flow, units, and partnerships, and he takes a lot of pride in terms of getting it right. But I don't think he's always consistent in doing so when you see certain players drop out. And like, I remember he did a fantastic interview once where I think it was before a Champions League game, where he talks about, that's it. It was post Fulham, where we had, on the left-hand side, we had Timber, Declan Rice, and Trossard. And he said, 3 right-footers on the right, it affects the flow, etc. So he knows this, right? That's just an example. But you don't necessarily always see it come to fruition on the pitch in terms of who he's put in certain spaces, where you're thinking, that doesn't seem really balanced. But this is from someone who takes a lot of pride in terms of that as well. So, yeah, that is really interesting.
And maybe we'll address that in the summer. Who knows? I mean, I can't... It's difficult with Zubimendi to see how that works, but maybe we do see that. Maybe we see Zubimendi stepping up a little bit further. Maybe that's Mikel's vision, is that, as George is saying, when he drops out, Zubi steps up, and we have a different type of flow in the midfield. I don't know, but currently there's lots of questions about Odegaard, and obviously we'll continue to talk as the season goes on. It leaves Arsenal having lost to West Ham on 53 points, with Liverpool on 64 points after their win today. We do have a game in hand, lads, so we're technically only 8 points behind if we win that game in hand, so you never know. Arsenal have a fixture against Nottingham Forest away in February. Then we have our United game in March, the Chelsea game in the middle of March. Then we don't have another game until April, where we have a run against Fulham, away at Everton, home to Brentford, away against Ipswich, at home against Crystal Palace. To be fair, that April looks okay on paper. And then May, to finish the season, we have home to Bournemouth. We have hopefully not a guard of honour against Liverpool on the 10th of May away at Anfield. And the final 2 games are at home to Newcastle United, which could be a big one, and away to Southampton. Sticking with you, Rohan, before we sort of go to the questions, where does this leave you in the title race? Look, I think we both said we don't think it's happening. But if I'm going through Liverpool's fixtures, there are, I'm trying to find some hope. They've still got that Newcastle game to come. They do in April have to go away to Craven Cottage. They've got that going and playing Everton. They've got to go away to Stamford Bridge. They've got to go away to the Brighton Stadium. What's it called? The Amex. And obviously they're playing us. So, if we are 8 points behind, it's not over, but it's looking increasingly hard.
I think this weekend was the ultimate dagger of daggers. Losing to West Ham at home and then them going on to beat Man City. And Man City, I watched the second half. Man City could have played for another 45 minutes. They weren't scoring in this game. It just feels like this weekend was the ultimate dagger. And I maintain Liverpool will drop more points this season, but I think the gap is just too big, especially with our situation of injuries as well. We need to be near perfect, and I don't see that happening, sadly. And it's frustrating. It's not what we want to hear. It's not the season that we wanted, but that's the situation we are in. And like I say, we spoke a lot about Mikel and the criticism of this game. I stand by it. There's been a lot of turbulence this season that has affected the outcome of what we can achieve in the league, and that is. I don't care if people think that's excuses. I stand by that, and I'm not going to allow a game on Saturday to change that narrative for me, and that's where I stand. It would need to be a miracle. Look at our injury situation. We're starting Mikel Merino at number 9 from the get.
To antidote to that doom and gloom from Rohan, I want to ask before we go on to questions, because this has been a really frustrating season in many ways, but there has been some big positives, and I wanted to come to your big positives from the season so far. We've still got 11 or so games to go. I think it's understandable to focus right now on what's gone wrong, 100%. But I think a season is always going to teach you stuff. A season is always going to bring up things that you didn't expect. Maybe sticking with you, Rohan. Has there been one big positive from this season that you've liked?
I've got 2.
You get one.
Right. Okay. I'll go for 1. I think. Okay. Obviously, we spoke a lot about Mikel Arteta and the tactical kryptonite of physical mid-blocks. But I do think that before a ball was kicked, one of the big criticisms that I had of Mikel Arteta, and every manager has them, is that his ability to react and develop or maintain consistency in terms of results when you lose certain players, I think that was questionable. Where I think before the season, I think everyone felt with Mikel, he needs the players available, his star players, continuity in that regard for us to build consistency, as we saw post-2024 to the end of last season, operating at a 100-point pace. Whereas I think this season, despite losing to West Ham, I think Arsenal in the league, in the absence of Bukayo Saka and the other injuries that have happened, alongside other injuries that happened earlier in the season, I think he showed a lot of ability in terms of reacting to adversity and being able to build consistency with our results. And we have gone on a really good run when you take all of that into consideration, barring obviously West Ham most recently in the league. Yeah. And I think that is one of my big positives. The other one was the Hairlanders, but yeah. Yeah, I think you've stolen mine. Yeah, I think the maybe we'll leave the Hairlanders to George, because he can have them. It's only fitting. But I think the frustrating part, making a positive into a negative, is that he has been so adaptable in other areas. Yes.
And that's the frustrating part when we come to talk about mid-blocks and the issues that we've just been discussing about that game, is that he has been so brilliantly adaptable actually this season in so many different forms and ways. With Merino and the Haylenders and at the beginning of the season when we were dealing with situations, how we adapted after we went a man down against Man City, even games like that. Like, there's been some amazing adaptations this season. And yeah, it's just bizarre that we can't find that adaptation. But just on positives, because I'm not going to go back into that. I think this might seem like a bit of a weird one, but I do think probably last summer, maybe like this time last year, there probably was a bit of debate at least to be had about, okay, where can this Arsenal team improve? Because we were so close to the title. And I think most people would have come down on the side of like an attacking sign or something. But I remember there was conversations and saying, we need to sign, more defenders, or we need to improve this player, or we need to get this player inside, or we need to, whatever it might be, or, we were probably having conversations about mid-blocks at that point. It felt like a range of answers that you could come to in terms of where Arsenal need to improve. I don't think now there is a single person inside or outside of Arsenal, which may also be a flaw when we come to negotiations, who don't know what we need to do. We need to add attack, and that is the bottom line. We need to add attacking talent. And it's weird to sort of call it a positive, but I think it's such an obvious thing to go into the summer with that, like, actually, if we do it, I think it's going to be such a big boost, and it's a really clear objective for the summer. It's a really clear for what the club need to do. This season has only, unfortunately, it's shown how much we need to do that last summer. But there's no doubt. There is absolutely no doubt. There can't be any conversations internally that are anything but we need to add attacking talent. And I think in some ways it clarifies it, and it constricts what we can do. And if we can do it, I think it could be a huge positive. But George, I'm sure you maybe want to go for the Highlanders, or maybe you don't.
I mean, that is definitely like a big positive that I had in general, and I can't hide away from it, because it's not even just the fact that they've been used, but how important and how open he has been to having them be pillars of a team. Like, that actually for me was a criticism that a lot of people had, because it wasn't just the idea of academy usage happening and being better, which I think is maybe a surface level part of the critique, but it was this idea, can he effectively groom talent, which I thought wasn't fair personally, but I'm going to present the issue that I think it was claimed. And even if he didn't do it as early as I wanted, and the exact plan, what is undoubted to have had two Highlanders at the age of, I want to be fair here, 18, have over 1,000 minutes played. Yes, it's because of injuries, but the fact that they've been indoctrinated into the squad so early, so quick, and trusted with that level of, unrelenting trust, and like praised and platformed, I think is fair. That it's a big positive as far as what we look at going forward, and as far as what the academy can look like. And I will end on this. Okay, we still are going to lose a lot of talent, by the way, but we are at least making effort to clean the U21s, to clean the U18s, and to clean the the progression from the U16s. And so there's actually been quite a bit of work done. There's other players that I'm not going to say, but I will warn, I'm afraid of what this may mean in the future. Like, we've got people quoting Muñez, who's 13 years old right now in the academy. And like, I think that's dangerous, like, in general. But there seems to be a little bit more of an attempt to clear fringe and redundancy in the academy, and use talent from the academy beyond just, by the way, Ethan Miles, Jack Porter. People forget about being 16 years old, again, forced through injuries, but to trust a 16-year-old like that, that's some serious trust beyond just the big Ethan and Miles that I think he's been willing to do.
Yeah. And just to use host privileges, to have a second, and just to not be accused of not saying the obvious thing. This season has been tough, but we are potentially 8 points behind still. And there's a lot of frustrations, of course, and many things that we can look at ourselves for. But when we consider the season we've had in terms of the injuries and the luck and all that stuff that we talked about a million times, the fact that we are only 8 points behind, having been on something like a 15-game Premier League unbeaten run and still in the Champions League and those sorts of things, this season may not end in a trophy, but there is, I think, a lot of positive that can be taken from the manner of things in that adversity. And some people won't like that because it doesn't end in a shiny thing, and that's understandable. But we have reacted really well to adversity, and we're still just about clinging on. Let's come to some questions. We asked you for some questions on Discord and X. Obviously, we'll give priority to our Discord members, our Patreon members and YouTube members on Discord. If you want to join that, you can join us on as a Canon member. What do we call them? Canon cuties? Well, that's our group chat name, isn't it? Let's come to this one from AFC Amir. Do you think it's possible at this stage for Arteta to alter his ethos or game model? We are far too defensively pragmatic, and it's blunted our attacking dynamics. Can he learn from this, or is it too late? I think this kind of comes back to my positive in that I don't think it's a debate whether Arsenal need to spend upwards of £100 million, whether that's on one player or two players or whatever, we can have that discussion, in the attacking areas. And we were discussing before about how maybe one of Arteta's problems is that he is too keen to platform players and make them do exactly what they're comfortable doing. If you go and spend money on an Isak, you sign a set of skills that will force him to change his attacking dynamics because it's what a player like Isak is comfortable doing or can do. So I think there is a world where this summer, because of the clarity of what we need to do, our attacking ethos and the way we attack is kind of gonna have to change because we have to spend money. And I think Arteta will inevitably respond to that.
Well, I've said this quite a bit on podcasts. I'd like to see a definition of our attacking identity that I feel. If I was to describe, actually, I'll just ask you guys this question instead of going on a rant. When you go through this, could you guys say that you can define what a goalkeeping profile looks like for Arsenal, even if you don't know the name? Like, can you identify exactly what a goalkeeper looks like for Arsenal? I think you guys can, right? If I was to ask you, what does a defender look like for Mikel Arteta and in the way he's used, I think you guys can clearly define that for me. I would even argue as far as midfielders go. Ignoring my favorite quote about physical intensity in the Premier League, could you guys not feel that you could define what a really successful Mikel Arteta...
Probably a 6'8". Yeah, a 6'8", yeah.
Yeah, okay. The attacking identity, can you guys confidently tell me what Mikel Arteta would like to do? And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I can. I think he's somebody that isn't wedded to a particular idea, but at some point, for as much as you want to be a chameleon and accepting different ways of balance, you have to identify with a particular type of attacking identity. And actually, I think that's my biggest challenge for Mikel, if I'm really being honest. And I just want to go further with Amir. I would actually underline this. I want to see Arsenal become better at transitions. I don't care if you want to talk about the recruitment side. We spent a lot of this pod actually talking tactically and decision making in transitions. This is working with what he has. I think Mikel, if you're looking at ways to improve, the idea that we've gone 21 games with only 24% of point totals is the biggest point of improvement in this Arsenal team, period. So yes, it's coming from attacking talent, but I'm going to go one step further from a coaching perspective. Please tell me you've got a transition identity for the best counter-pressing team in the world. Otherwise, what's the point in having that as a pro if you're not going to reap the benefits of it in possession?
This is what it is. It's like, and going back to the original part of that question, it's like the game model. Arsenal don't need to change their game model in a drastic way. Arsenal need to add more flavour to their game model. That is where I've always felt with it. When we're talking about transitions, I agree. I feel like that is the biggest aspect of our game in which we can improve on. Rest attack. Arsenal are fantastic, rest defence-wise. But rest attack, Liverpool and Real Madrid, for me, they're the two best teams out there in Europe consistently who have been able to do that. Bayern Munich last season as well were really good. The number of goals they scored as well. But that is where Arsenal can become way better. There are other things where Arsenal can become better at, but in terms of like the level of improvement, it's there. And I mean, as George just kind of went through each position, like when you look at our expenditure in Arteta's tenure, it kind of makes sense as well, where we haven't invested loads of money in our front line, whereas we invest in other areas for a number of different reasons. So it's a lot easier to be able to actually understand what Arsenal do to a T in those areas of the pitch. So that's why this summer, just invest in some top attackers.
Yeah.
You know,
there's no replacement for it. Yeah. There's no replacement for it. Let's come to a question from Archton, who says, given how deflated the fan base and players are, I think it would be important to discuss goals for the rest of the season. Try and score them. Beyond the highly unlikely honours. Things like making the club look attractive enough for our summer targets and for our prized players to stay. I have one. I'm sure there's lots that we could discuss. I would love to get a big contract done. An extension done. So if I'm looking at the players who I'm probably referring to, Bukayo Saka expires in 2027. Gabriel Magalhaes expires in 2027, as does William Saliba, as does Gabriel Martinelli. I think the others beyond the sort of 2028, I'm okay to leave. I'm probably looking at those 4 players. So one of Saka, Gabriel, Saliba, or Martinelli, if indeed Martinelli is staying. But like, it's one of those things, if Martinelli's staying, I want to see that done. And then in 2026, you've got Trossard, Zinchenko, and Tomiyasu. I think it'll be difficult to do those. I'm not sure any of those send a message. So I think probably for me, it's those guys, 4 guys who are all sort of expiring in the same year. I'm looking at Liverpool, and actually, George, until you pointed out, I didn't realise that they have even Konate is expiring in 2026, and on top of their Van Dijk and Salah and Trent situation. I don't want us to get into that camp. Look, it might be very, very hard for Arsenal to do a contract like that before the end of the season, considering what's happening, but I would absolutely love it. I would also love us to do a deal early, like, if we're going to do a Zubimendi, get it confirmed. If we are going to go and do a Benjamin Šeško, go and get it confirmed. I think that would be a big thing. I think there's an element with contracts and an element with keeping people at a club where it's kind of like a year 6 disco. If people know what I'm talking about, it's kind of, well, if he's going, I'll go, and if he's going, I'll go, and if he's going, I'll go. And you've kind of got to make that confidence in a club. I would love to see a big contract done, or certainly conversations about it. That's something before the end of the season. And that's off the pitch, but that's something.
I've got a big thing. I want a freaking sporting director appointed before the international break, and I'm going to go one step further. I've said this on pods, and I've got a lot of pushback from it. I want clarity from the club about the messaging for what they have for the future, because we've talked about how it's absolutely certain that a forward signing needs to happen and needs to come. I hear the fears when people say, well, in 2024 they didn't do it. And as far as priority goes, yes, we had a lot of them, but the forward was the number one priority. Last summer, we didn't do it. So I would like the sporting director that does come, I would like to have an interview about his philosophy about how he sees squad building. I would like to understand what the strategic elements of what a future of Arsenal look like as far as his imprint. I've heard what Mikel is. I know who Mikel is. I know the culture around that. I would like a very clear identification of how this structure works. I would like a clear identification to the limits and understanding whose responsibility is what. When you talk about Richard Garlick, is he CEO? What is he doing? I would like clarity for, if you are the man at sporting director, outline what your job entails. Outline what you're going to do to support, your philosophy for how you'd like to do it, and how you feel we can achieve those things in the short term. Long term, we can talk about that. You can have a discussion about that after the window. I want all that stuff done now, before the international break. Yeah. If we go and we don't have a sporting director, guys, it's not the fact that I'm afraid of deals. I am afraid for what that power vacuum will look like for the summer that we had to deal with all of last summer. And I don't buy that excuse can run 2 years running.
Yeah, we absolutely need to get it done. Because make no mistake, conversations were happening last summer about this summer. They're definitely happening about this summer right now. So we need to be in those conversations. Rohan, anything else? Maybe on the pitch?
Yeah, on the pitch. Don't go out on a whimper. That's always what I feel. Like, I'm 22-23 season, I felt Arsenal went out on a whimper at the end, personally. When you look at some of those results towards the end, against Brighton, the 3-0, then followed by Forest, 1-0. We smashed Wolves on the final day, but it wasn't a good end to the season. Like, let's say Liverpool get it done and dusted, they keep winning games, fine. It is what it is, fair play to them. Don't then start going on a run of form in which we just keep drawing or losing, fight till the end. And I know it's quite passionate, like Yadar, but
maximize your points.
I do think that maximize your points and just do everything you can as a team. And we still have the Champions League. Now, I actually think we've got the worst possible draw after PSV if we beat PSV, because you're looking at Atletico Madrid, who are literally our tactical kryptonite. You're looking at the types of teams we struggle against. They are, to a T, a type of team we struggle against. And then Real Madrid, in a Champions League context, are literally the final boss. So it's not going to be easy, but just don't go out on a whimper and give the fans something. That's all I want, really.
Yeah. Few questions. One saying, certainly not Arsenal trivia. Yeah, thanks, Josh. One saying, would love a 20-minute discourse on the migratory patterns of the sparrow. I'm not sure we got that. Let's do one from the Discord to finish us off. One from Ash, who says, how do you think our defenders feel? Knowing if they concede one goal, the game is over. Must be really taxing mentally. And I suppose I want to blow that up slightly. I think we are still numbers-wise pretty good defensively. But I don't feel the same way as I did last season. Rohan, is there anything to your eye that you think's changed this season in terms of the way we're approaching defensively? Do you think it's the mix of back lines we've had? Because weirdly, sort of individually, I feel like everyone's had a decent season. Like in terms of Raya, I think has had his best season in Arsenal shirt. I think Slim and Gabriel, yeah, they've had their games and their moments, but you know they are still the best centre-back partnership in the league. Jurien Timber's Herculean effort this season. We've obviously found Miles as well. But I think in terms of numbers, we are on to concede more than we did last season. I could be wrong in saying that, but we've got 23 goals conceded. I think we had conceded like 27 or something last season. So I think we're on to concede more. Do you see anything changing this season, or anything has changed?
Not really. Like I do think that we are making more individual errors. I think Saliba's
29 conceded last season, and we're on 23 so far. So yeah. I
think Saliba's had a fantastic season. But I think he's going through. Well, he's having a little bit of a dip in the last couple of games, really, and you're seeing more errors there in terms of playing out and trying to find that pass, and it's being loose. I think that's one of the big things that has quite frustrated me in the last two games against Leicester and West Ham, where sometimes it is as simple as if you keep giving the ball away, you're going to leave yourself in a spot of bother. And I felt we've been doing that a lot more recently. But I still think we're a fantastic team defensively. I still feel very, very similar to last season. What we also have to understand is the level of the Premier League is a lot higher outside the Big Six as well. And West Ham, in terms of transitions, they're a top team. In terms of the likes of Jarrod Bowen, Kudus, the way they attack forward and how they are able to commit bodies forward. It's not easy, you know. And but I do hear that side of the argument in terms of the original question of it must be quite taxing, especially for a defender right now, knowing Arsenal really aren't going to be scoring 3, 4, 5 goals to win games in this moment of time. So there is more reliance on your backline to be able to keep you in it. As you saw the Miles Lewis-Skelly moment against Leicester, you know, like we need to be quite perfect at the moment at the back in order for us to achieve the desired results. So that can be quite taxing. But I still think defensively, the numbers don't lie. Arsenal still hold the highest line outside of Bayern Munich in Europe. Arsenal still are fantastic defensively, you know. So
yeah, George, in terms of turning games round, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but
that's something.
I think that is something for us this season. I suppose that's maybe to come off the defensive conversation. It's like, you know, obviously we had the West Ham game, we had the Newcastle game we couldn't turn around.
But that's sorry to cut in. That's always been an issue. That's always been an issue in terms of being able to turn games around. There aren't loads of examples of Arsenal being able to turn a deficit around into a winning outcome. There are times in which we've done it. There are times we've done it this season, like Brentford, for example.
Yeah, we did it against Brentford. Yeah.
But there's not loads of examples. If you go from the start of Arsenal's time of competing for a title, 22-23 season, go and list off the games. We don't do it loads. That's why it feels like we have to be. There is never. Remember the previous pod I said there was 4 games I felt since 22-23 in which Arsenal have kind of like scammed a result. That's it. So it's
Yeah, I was just looking through the results. It is a game state we struggle in, George.
No, completely.
It's bizarre.
And I don't understand, because originally, if you guys remember back in 2021, I believe, there was this issue of the high line not being maintained when we did go down. There was a tendency for the team to drop back, and there was a whole debate, is Mikel asking for that, right? Like, is it a mentality shift? But mate, how many times have you told me on the pod you feel like we have to be perfect to win? And, you know, if it's not our day, we tend to struggle. Like, it's been a feeling that has been around for so long.
It's been for a while, but I do feel it's so related to attacking talent. I really do. Like, it has to. I'm sorry that everything comes back to it, but I also feel that I can't remember who said it, but I saw someone saying this, and like I remember that Brighton game when we had the red card. That was August 2024, and I remember even that day feeling like title's over. And I think that is a big thing for us. And I feel like this whole season, because of Liverpool's form, because of what's happened in the last few seasons, it's almost like we're so afraid to drop points that we do play with this kind of, I don't know, fear in some. I do think there is something in that.
I hate to keep hammering. Like, this is my opinion, but I hate to keep hammering it. But I'll ask you guys: do you guys think that there's another game state that Arsenal struggle in besides transitions? Like, I can point that Arsenal are roughly 12th in terms of making transitions to shots in the league. In terms of that specific game,
I think we're worse than that.
We are, but roughly 12th and mid-table is the point. Is there another facet to our game model that we are mid-table in? Like, ignoring the talent debate, but purely tactically, as far as high line goes, final third, sustaining in the final third, entries even into zone 14, by the way, we're not mid-table, even then.
Yeah. I think even our conversion's actually pretty good. It might be chance volume, potentially.
Yeah. Are we mid-table as chance volume?
I don't know. I'm trying to find out.
Like, I don't know. I'm open to suggestions, but I actually legitimately think that is factually the only statistic that Arsenal are quote-unquote mid-table or worse than mid-table at in any game model.
Yeah, definitely in terms of mid-table. I think there are things like, I still maintain, like, statistically Arsenal go long.
From
I
goal
think
kicks.
like the third most in the league.
Yeah.
I think Forest and Everton are the only two teams that go long more than Arsenal. And it's a staple to our game. I've said it many times. But I think Arsenal as a team can do way better at playing through pressure. Even in this game against West Ham, when West Ham pressed high, there were two moments I saw. They won the ball back in our defensive third. They won it back because we weren't able to find solutions against that. Maybe we're not mid-table, but I think there are a few teams who are better at us than that.
And there's one...
We're 8th for overall XG.
Okay, so it's nearing on mid-table, so it's not great. But I guess my point is that transition to shot total is like one of the worst in the league, which to me, if I combine it with it being the highest line in the league, is an incredibly damning statistic. Because you're saying that Arsenal are one of the best teams in defensively, we're one of the highest lines, and we have one of the highest field tilt numbers, not to sit there and joke, but that just factually means that you've got the team that presses teams in one of the most in the league, and yet our transitions are one of the worst in the league. I also think, I don't have the numbers to back it up, but do you guys remember last season there was this statistic that talked about passing tempo, and it talked about how vertical every team in the league was, and there was comparisons between Manchester City and Arsenal for how vertical our passing collections were, especially when we were in drawn or in losing game states. And there was a thing in which we were really quite, vertical. We rushed certain actions in those moments. I feel that. And it kind of leads to why maybe the transitions to shots are really poor. I don't think we judge tempo very well, especially when we're leading or drawing in those conceding game states. Just in general, whether that's making sure that we're aggressive with our passing, making sure we strike the balance between tempo in those game states. I think those two things, if I can improve those two things, I see a very different type of Arsenal next season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just having a quick look at shots, and I think there are other statistics that we are a bit more mid-table. Although I will say our non-penalty goals minus expected goals, we are top, lads. Hey.
Efficiency is not
top along with
the biggest problem.
Efficiency is not our problem. Certainly isn't a problem. And we will take that. We will take any win we can right now. Look, it's not over. It is never over until it's mathematically over. We are potentially 8 points behind Liverpool. We still have to go to them. They still have some tough fixtures coming up. So do we, and we just have to keep going. Look, it's incredibly hard to consider that we might actually do something this season, certainly in the league. But yeah, look, until it's over,
it ain't over till it's over,
keep turning
baby.
Up. No, but like, I know I'm not trying to be positive. You just have to keep turning up, don't you? Like, all we can do is play the next game and try and win that. And yeah, just see what happens. But listen, it is a pleasure, regardless, to chat Arsenal with you. Thank you all for listening. If you want to check us out on Spotify and Apple, etc., and give us a review, please do. Got loads of YouTube content coming. Got an instant reaction to the Forest game coming up. We will have probably a scouted, because there ain't no chance I'm rewatching that game with you, George. Scouted for you on Tuesday. Got the data pod coming up, so yeah, lots of stuff coming your way this week. Thank you so much for being part of the Cannon podcast. Thank you, George.
Thank you, good sir.
Thank you, Rohan. Forgot your name.
Nice one.
Thank you so much for listening and watching, and thanks for keeping it Arsenal.